Peg of Limavaddy. Between Coleraine and Derry there is a daily car, besides one or two occasional queer-looking coaches, and I had this vehicle, with an intelligent driver, and a horse with a hideous raw on his shoulder. Entirely to myself for the 25 miles of our journey. The cabins of Coleraine are not parted with in a hurry, and we crossed the bridge, and went up and down the hills of one of the suburban streets, the band flowing picturesquely to our left. A large Catholic chapel, the before-mentioned cabins, and farther on, some neat-looking houses and plantations, to our right. Then we began ascending wide lonely hills, pools of bog shining here and there amongst them, with birds, both black and white, both geese and crows, on the hunt. Some of the stubble was already ploughed up, but by the side of most cottages you saw a black potato field that it was time to dig now, for the weather was changing and the winds beginning to roar. Woods, whenever we passed them, were flinging round eddies of mustard-colored leaves, the white trunks of lime and ash trees beginning to look very bare. Then we stopped to give the raw-backed horse water. Then we trotted down a hill with a noble bleak prospect of Loch Foyle and the surrounding mountains before us, until we reached the town of Newtown Limavaddy, where the raw-backed horse was exchanged for another not much more agreeable in his appearance, though, like his comrade, not slow on the road. Newtown Limavaddy is the third town in the county of Londonderry. It comprises 3 well-built streets, the others are inferior. It is, however, respectably inhabited. All this may be true, as the well-informed guide-book avers, but I am bound to say that I was thinking of something else as we drove through the town. Having fallen eternally in love during the 10 minutes of our stay. Yes, Peggy of Limavaddy, if Barrow and Inglis have gone to Connemara to fall in love with the Mrs. Flynn, let us be allowed to come to Ulster and offer a tribute of praise at your stockingless feet, O Margaret. Do you remember the October day, 'twas the first day of the hard weather, when the wayworn traveller entered your inn? But the circumstances of this passion had better be chronicled in deathless verse. Peg of Limavaddy. Riding from Coleraine, famed for lovely Kitty, came a Cockney bound unto Derry city. Weary was his soul, shivering and sad he bumped along the road. Leads to Limavaddy. Mountains sketched around. Gloomy was their tinting. And the horses' hoofs made a dismal clinting. Wind upon the heath. Howling was and piping. On the heath and bog. Black with many a snipe in. Mid the bogs of black. Silver pools were flashing. Crowds upon their sides. Picking were and splashing. Cockney on the car. Closer folds his plaidie. Grumbling at the road. Leads to Limavaddy. Through the crashing woods. Autumn brawled and blustered. Tossing round about. Leaves the hue of mustard. Yonder lay Loch Foyle, which a storm was whipping, covering with mist lake, and shores, and shipping. Up and down the hill. Nothing could be bolder. Horse went with a raw, bleeding on his shoulder. Where are the horses changed? Said I to the laddie, driving on the box. Sir, at Limavaddy. Limavaddy Inns, but a humble bait house, where you may procure whiskey and potatoes. Landlord at the door gives a smiling welcome to the shivering wights who to his lintel come. Landlady within sits and knits a stocking with a weary foot. Baby's cradle rocking to the chimney nook. Having found admittance, there I watch a pup playing with 2 kittens, playing round the fire, which of blazing turf is roaring to the pot, which bubbles with the Murphy's winky face. And the cradled babe, fond the mother nursed it, singing it a song, as she twists the worsted. Up and down the stair. 2 more young ones patter. Twins were never seen, dirtier nor fatter. Both have mottled legs. Both have snubby noses. Both have here the host. Kindly interposes. Sure you must be froze. With the sleet and hail, sir. So will you have some punch? Or will you have some ale, sir? Presently a maid enters with the liquor. Half a pot of ale. Froth in a beaker. Gods! I didn't know what my beating heart meant. Hebe's self, I thought, entered the apartment. As she came she smiled. And the smile bewitching, on my word and honor, lighted all the kitchen. With a curtsy neat, greeting the newcomer. Lovely, smiling Peg offers me the rummer. But my trembling hand up the beaker tilted, and the glass of ale. Every drop I spilt it every drop. Dames, who read my volumes, pardon such a word. On my what dicolia mess, witnessing the sight of that dire disaster, out began to laugh. Mrs., maid, and master. Such a merry peal, specially Miss Peg's was, as the glass of ale trickling down my legs was, that the joyful sound of that ringing laughter echoed in my ears many a long day after. Such a silver peal in the meadows listening, you who've heard the bells ringing to a christening, you who ever heard Caradori pretty smiling like an angel, singing Giovanetti. Fancy Peggy's laugh, sweet and clear and cheerful, at my pantaloons, with half a pint of beer full. When the laugh was done, Peg, the pretty hussy, moved about the room, wonderfully busy. Now she looks to see if the kettle keep hot. Now she rubs the spoons. Now she cleans the teapot. Now she sets the cups trimly and secure. Now she scours a pot. And so it was I drew her. Thus it was I drew her. Scouring of a kettle. Faith! Her blushing cheeks reddened on the metal. Ah! But 'tis in vain that I try to sketch it. The pot perhaps is like, but Peggy's face is wretched. No, the best of lead and of Indian rubber never could depict that sweet kettle scrubber. See her as she moves. Scarce the ground she touches. Airy as a fay. Graceful as a duchess. Bare her rounded arm. Bare her little leg is. Vestris never showed ankles like to Peggy's. Braided is her hair. Soft her look and modest. Slim her little waist. Comfortably bodiced. This I do declare. Happy is the laddie who the heart can share of Peg of Limavaddy. Married if she were, blessed would be the daddy of the children fair of Peg of Limavaddy. Beauty is not rare in the land of Paddy. Fair beyond compare is Peg of Limavaddy. Citizen or squire, Tory, Whig, or Radical would all desire Peg of Limavaddy. Had I Homer's fire, or that of Sergeant Taddy, meetly I'd admire Peg of Limavaddy. And till I expire, or till I grow mad, I will sing unto my lyre Peg of Limavaddy. The late Mr. Pope represents Camilla as scouring the plain, an absurd and useless task. Peggy's occupation with the kettle is more simple and noble. The second line of this verse, whereof the author scorns to deny an obligation, is from the celebrated Frithiof of Esaias Tigner. A maiden is serving warriors to drink, and is standing by a shelled und die run de Schilds ward wie das Magdalene Roth, perhaps the best thing in both poems. Templemoyle Derry. From Newtown Limavaddy to Derry the traveller has many wild and noble prospects of Loch Foyle and the plains and mountains round it. and of scenes which may possibly in this country be still more agreeable to him, of smiling cultivation, and comfortable well-built villages, such as are only too rare in Ireland. Of a great part of this district the London companies are landlords, the best of landlord, too, according to the report I could gather. And their good stewardship shows itself especially in the neat villages of Muff and Ballyally, through both of which I passed. In Ballyally, besides numerous simple, stout, brick-built dwellings for the peasantry, with their shining windows and trim garden plots, is a Presbyterian meeting house, so well built, substantial, and handsome, so different from the lean, pretentious, sham Gothic ecclesiastical edifices which have been erected of late years in Ireland, that it can't fail to strike the tourist who has made architecture his study or his pleasure. The gentlemen's seats in the district are numerous and handsome, and the whole movement along the road betokened cheerfulness and prosperous activity. As the carman had no other passengers but myself, he made no objection to carry me a couple of miles out of his way, through the village of Muff, belonging to the grocers of London, and so handsomely and comfortably built by them as to cause all cockneys to exclaim, "Well done our side." And thence to a very interesting institution, which was established some 15 years since in the neighbourhood, the Agricultural Seminary of Templemoyle. It lies on a wooded hill in a pretty wooded country, and is most curiously secluded from the world by the tortuousness of the road which approaches it. Of course it is not my business to report upon the agricultural system practiced there or to discourse on the state of the land or the crops. The best testimony on this subject is the fact, that the institution hired, at a small rental, a tract of land, which was reclaimed and farmed, and that of this farm the landlord has now taken possession, leaving the young farmers to labor on a new tract of land, for which they pay 5 times as much rent as for their former holding. But though a person versed in agriculture could give a far more satisfactory account of the place than one to whom such pursuits are quite unfamiliar, there is a great deal about the establishment which any citizen can remark on. And he must be a very difficult cockney indeed who won't be pleased here. After winding in and out and up and down, and round about the eminence on which the house stands, we at last found an entrance to it, by a courtyard, neat, well-built and spacious, where are the stables and numerous offices of the farm. The scholars were at dinner off a comfortable meal of boiled beef, potatoes, and cabbages. When I arrived, a master was reading a book of history to them, and silence, it appears, is preserved during the dinner. 70 scholars were here assembled, some young, and some expanded into 6 feet and whiskers. All, however, are made to maintain exactly the same discipline, whether whiskered or not. The head farmer of the school, Mr. Campbell, a very intelligent Scotch gentleman, was good enough to conduct me over the place and the farm, and to give a history of the establishment and the course pursued there. The seminary was founded in 1827, by the North West of Ireland Society, by members of which and others about £3,000 were subscribed, and the buildings of the school erected. These are spacious, simple, and comfortable. There is a good stone house, with airy dormitories, schoolrooms, and large and convenient offices. The establishment had, at first, some difficulties to contend with, and for some time did not number more than 30 pupils. At present, there are 70 scholars, paying £10 a year, with which sum, and the labor of the pupils on the farm, and the produce of it, the school is entirely supported. The reader will, perhaps, like to see an extract from the report of the school, which contains more details regarding it. On Tuesday B commences work in the morning and A at school, and so on alternate days. Each class is again subdivided into 3 divisions, over each of which is placed a monitor, selected from the steadiest and best informed boys. He receives the head farmer's directions as to the work to be done, and superintends his party while performing it. In winter the time of labor is shortened according to the length of the day, and the hours at school increased. In wet days, when the boys cannot work out, all are required to attend school. Rules of the Templemoyle School. 1. The pupils are required to say their prayers in the morning before leaving the dormitory, and at night, before retiring to rest, each separately, and after the manner to which he has been habituated. 2. The pupils are requested to wash their hands and faces before the commencement of business in the morning, on returning from agricultural labor, and after dinner. 3. The pupils are required to pay the strictest attention to their instructors, both during the hours of agricultural and literary occupation. 4. Strife, disobedience, inattention, or any description of riotous or disorderly conduct, is punishable by extra labor or confinement, as directed by the committee, according to circumstances. 5. Diligent and respectable behavior, continued for a considerable time, will be rewarded by occasional permission for the pupil so distinguished to visit his home. 6. No pupil, on obtaining leave of absence, shall presume to continue it for a longer period than that prescribed to him on leaving the seminary. 7. During their rural labor, the pupils are to consider themselves amenable to the authority of their agricultural instructor alone, and during their attendance in the schoolroom, to that of their literary instructor alone. 8. Non-attendance during any part of the times allotted either for literary or agricultural employment, will be punished as a serious offense. 9. During the hours of recreation the pupils are to be under the superintendence of their instructors, and not suffered to pass beyond the limits of the farm, except under their guidance, or with a written permission from one of them. 10. The pupils are required to make up their beds, and keep those clothes not in immediate use neatly folded up in their trunks, and to be particular in never suffering any garment, book, implement, or other article belonging to or used by them to lie about in a slovenly or disorderly manner. 11. Respect to superior, and gentleness of demeanor, both among the pupils themselves and towards the servants and laborers of the establishment, are particularly insisted upon, and will be considered a prominent ground of approbation and record. 12. On Sundays, the pupils are required to attend their respective places of worship, accompanied by their instructors or monitors. And it is earnestly recommended to them to employ a part of the remainder of the day in sincerely reading the Word of God, and in such other devotional exercises as their respective ministers may point out. At certain periods of the year, when all hands are required, such as harvest, and the literary labors of the scholars are stopped, and they are all in the field. On the present occasion we followed them into a potato field, where an army of them were employed digging out the potatoes, while another regiment were trenching in elsewhere for the winter. The boys were leading the carts to and fro. To reach the potatoes we had to pass a field, part of which was newly ploughed. The ploughing was the work of the boys, too. One of them being left with an experienced ploughman for a fortnight at a time, in which space the lad can acquire some practice in the art. Amongst the potatoes and the boys digging them, I observed a number of girls, taking them up as dug and removing the soil from the roots. Such a society for 70 young men would, in any other country in the world, be not a little dangerous, but Mr. Campbell said that no instance of harm had ever occurred in consequence, and I believe his statement may be fully relied on. The whole country bears testimony to this noble purity of morals. Is there any other in Europe which in this point can compare with it? In winter the farm works do not occupy the pupils so much, and they give more time to their literary studies. They get a good English education. They are grounded in arithmetic and mathematics, and I saw a good map of an adjacent farm, made from actual survey by one of the pupils. Some of them are good draftsmen likewise, but of their performances I could see no specimen, the artists being abroad, occupied wisely in digging the potatoes. And here apropos, not of the school but of potatoes, let me tell a potato story, which is, I think, to the purpose, wherever it is told. In the county of Mayo a gentleman by the name of Crofton is a landed proprietor, in whose neighborhood great distress prevailed among the peasantry during the spring and summer, when the potatoes of the last year were consumed, and before those of the present season were up. Mr. Crofton, by liberal donations on his own part, and by a subscription which was set on foot among his friends in England as well as in Ireland, was enabled to collect a sum of money sufficient to purchase meal for the people, which was given to them, or sold at very low prices, until the pressure of want was withdrawn, and the blessed potato crop came in. Some time in October, a smart night's frost made Mr. Crofton think that it was time to take in and pit his own potatoes, and he told his steward to get laborers accordingly. Next day, on going to the potato grounds, he found the whole fields swarming with people, the whole crop was out of the ground, and again under it, pitted and covered, and the people gone, in a few hours. It was as if the fairies that we read of in the Irish legends, as coming to the aid of good people and helping them in their labors, had taken a liking to this good landlord, and taken in his harvest for him. Mr. Crofton, who knew who his helpers had been, sent the steward to pay them their day's wages, and to thank them at the same time for having come to help him at a time when their labor was so useful to him. One and all refused a penny. And their spokesman said, they wished they could do more for the likes of him or his family. I have heard of many conspiracies in this country, is not this one as worthy to be told as any of them? Round the house of Templemoyle is a pretty garden, which the pupils take pleasure in cultivating, filled not with fruit, for this, though there are 70 gardeners, the superintendent said somehow seldom reached a ripe state, but with kitchen herbs. And a few beds of pretty flowers, such as are best suited to cottage horticulture. Such simple carpenters' and masons' work as the young men can do is likewise confided to them. And though the dietary may appear to the Englishman as rather a scanty one, and though the English lads certainly make at first very wry faces at the stirabout porridge, as they naturally will when first put in the presence of that abominable mixture, yet after a time, strange to say, they begin to find it actually palatable. And the best proof of the excellence of the diet is that nobody is ever ill in the institution, colds and fevers and the ailments of lazy, gluttonous gentility, are unknown. And the doctor's bill for the last year, for 70 pupils, amounted to 35 shillings. O beati agricoliculi! You do not know what it is to feel a little uneasy after half a crown's worth of raspberry tarts, as lads do at the best public schools. You don't know in what majestic polished hexameters the Roman poet has described your pursuits, you are not faggied and flogged into Latin and Greek at the cost of £200 a year. Let these be the privileges of your youthful betters. Meanwhile content yourselves with thinking that you are preparing for a profession, while they are not. That you are learning something useful, while they, for the most part, are not, for after all as a man grows old in the world, old and fat. Cricket is discovered not to be any longer very advantageous to him. Even to have pulled in the Trinity boat does not in old age amount to a substantial advantage. And though to read a Greek play be an immense pleasure, yet it must be confessed few enjoy it. In the first place, of the race of Etonians, and Harrovians and Carthusians that one meets in the world, very few can read the Greek. Of those few there are not, as I believe, any considerable majority of poets. Stout men in the bow windows of clubs, for such young Etonians by time become, are not generally remarkable for a taste for Aeschylus, and then, how much Latin and Greek does the public school boy know? Also does he know anything else, and what? Is it history, or geography, or mathematics or divinity? You do not hear much poetry in Westminster Hall, or I believe at the bar tables afterwards. And if occasionally, in the House of Commons, Sir Robert Peel lets off a quotation, a pocket pistol wadded with a leaf torn out of Horace, depend on it, it is only to astonish the country gentlemen who don't understand him, and it is my firm conviction that Sir Robert no more cares for poetry than you or I do. Such thoughts would suggest themselves to a man who has had the benefit of what is called an education at a public school in England. When he sees 70 lads from all parts of the empire learning what his Latin poets and philosophers have informed him is the best of all pursuits. Finds them educated at 1/20th part of the cost which has been bestowed on his own precious person. Orderly without the necessity of submitting to degrading personal punishment, young, and full of health and blood, though vice is unknown among them. Brought up decently and honestly to know the things which it is good for them in their profession to know. So it is, however, all the world is improving except the gentlemen. There are at this present writing 500 boys at Eton, kicked, and licked, and bullied, by another 100 scrubbing shoes, running errands, making false concords, and, as if that were a natural consequence, putting their posteriors on a block for Dr. Hawtrey to lash at, and still calling it education. They are proud of it, good heavens, absolutely vain of it, as what dull barbarians are not proud of their dullness and barbarism. They call it the good old English system, nothing like classics, says Sir John, to give a boy a taste, you know, and a habit of reading, Sir John, who reads the racing calendar. And belongs to a race of men of all the world the least given to reading. It's the good old English system, every boy fights for himself hardens, Jack. Jack grins, and helps himself to another glass of claret, and presently tells you how Tibbs and Miller fought for an hour and 20 minutes, like good UNS. Let us come to an end, however, of this moralising. The car driver has brought the old raw-shouldered horse out of the stable, and says it is time to be off again. Before quitting Templemoyle, one thing more may be said in its favour. It is one of the very few public establishments in Ireland where pupils of the two religious denominations are received, and where no religious disputes have taken place. The pupils are called upon, morning and evening, to say their prayers privately. On Sunday, each division, Presbyterian, Roman Catholic, and Episcopalian, is marched to its proper place of worship. The pastors of each sect may visit their young flock when so inclined, and the lads devote the Sabbath evening to reading the books pointed out to them by their clergymen. Would not the Agricultural Society of Ireland, of the success of whose peaceful labours for the national prosperity every Irish newspaper I read brings some new indication, do well to show some mark of its sympathy for this excellent institution of Templemoyle? A silver medal given by the Society to the most deserving pupil of the year, would be a great object of emulation amongst the young men educated at the place, and would be almost a certain passport for the winner in seeking for a situation in after life. I do not know if similar seminaries exist in England. Other seminaries of a like nature have been tried in this country, and have failed, but English country gentlemen cannot, I should think, find a better object of their attention than this school. And our farmers would surely find such establishments of great benefit to them, where their children might procure a sound literary education at a small charge, and at the same time be made acquainted with the latest improvements in their profession. I can't help saying here, once more, what I have said apropos of the excellent school at Dundalk, and begging the English middle classes to think of the subject. If government will not act, upon what never can be effectual, perhaps, until it become a national measure, let small communities act for themselves, and tradesmen and the middle classes set up cheap proprietary schools. Will country newspaper editors, into whose hands this book may fall, be kind enough to speak upon this hint, and extract the tables of the Templemoyle and Dundalk establishments, to show how, and with what small means, boys may be well, soundly, and humanely educated, not brutally, as some of us have been, under the bitter fagging in the shameful rod. It is no plea for the barbarity that use has made us accustomed to it. And in seeing these institutions for humble lads, where the system taught is at once useful, manly, and kindly, and thinking of what I had undergone in my own youth, of the frivolous monkish trifling in which it was wasted, of the brutal tyranny to which it was subjected, I could look at the lads but with a sort of envy. Please God, their lot will be shared by thousands of their equals and their betters before long. It was a proud day for Dundalk, Mr. Thackeray well said, when, at the end of one of the vacations there, 14 English boys, and an Englishman with his little son in his hand, landed from the Liverpool packet, and, walking through the streets of the town, went into the schoolhouse quite happy. That was a proud day in truth for a distant Irish town, and I can't help saying that I grudge them the cause of their pride somewhat. Why should there not be schools in England as good, and as cheap, and as happy? With this, shaking Mr. Campbell gratefully by the hand, and begging all English tourists to go and visit his establishment, we trotted off for Londonderry, leaving at about a mile's distance from the town, and at the pretty lodge of St. Colum's, a letter, which was the cause of much delightful hospitality. St. Colum's Chapel, the walls of which still stand picturesquely in Sir George Hill's park, and from which that gentleman's seat takes its name, was here since the 6th century. It is but fair to give precedence to the mention of the old abbey, which was the father, as it would seem, of the town. The approach to the latter from 3 quarters, certainly, by which various avenues I had occasion to see it, is always noble. We had seen the spire of the cathedral peering over the hills for 4 miles on our way. It stands, a stalwart and handsome building, upon an eminence, round which the old-fashioned stout red houses of the town cluster, girt in with the ramparts and walls that kept out James's soldiers of old. Quays, factories, huge red warehouses, have grown round this famous old barrier, and now stretch along the river. A couple of large steamers and other craft lay within the bridge. And, as we passed over that stout wooden edifice, stretching 1,100 feet across the noble expanse of the Foyle, we heard along the quays a great thundering and clattering of iron work in an enormous steam frigate which has been built in Derry, and seems to lie alongside a whole street of houses. The suburb, too, through which we passed was bustling and comfortable, and the view was not only pleasing from its natural beauties, but has a manly, thriving, honest air of prosperity, which is no bad feature, surely, for a landscape. Nor does the town itself, as one enters it, belie, as many other Irish towns do, its first flourishing look. It is not splendid, but comfortable, a brisk movement in the streets, good downright shops, without particularly grand titles, few beggars. Nor have the common people, as they address you, that eager smile, that manner of compound fawning and swaggering, which an Englishman finds in the townspeople of the West and South. As in the north of England, too, when compared with other districts, the people are greatly more familiar, though by no means disrespectful to the stranger. On the other hand, after such a commerce as a traveller has with the race of waiters, postboys, porters, and the like, and it may be that the vast race of postboys, and whom I did not see in the north, are quite unlike those unlucky specimens with whom I came in contact, I was struck by their excessive greediness after the traveller's gratuities, and their fierce dissatisfaction if not sufficiently rewarded. To the gentleman who brushed my clothes at the comfortable hotel at Belfast, and carried my bags to the coach, I tendered the sum of 2 shillings. Which seemed to me quite a sufficient reward for his services. He battled and brawled with me for more, and got it too. For a street dispute with a porter calls together a number of delighted bystanders, whose remarks and company are by no means agreeable to a solitary gentleman. Then, again, there was the famous case of Boots of Ballycastle, which, being upon the subject, I may as well mention here. Boots of Ballycastle, that romantic little village near the Giant's Causeway, had cleaned a pair of shoes for me certainly, but declined either to brush my clothes, or to carry down my 2 carpet-bags to the car, leaving me to perform those offices for myself, which I did, and indeed they were not very difficult. But immediately I was seated on the car, Mr. Boots stepped forward and wrapped a mackintosh very considerately round me, and begged me at the same time to remember him. There was an old beggar woman standing by, to whom I had a desire to present a penny. And having no coin of that value, I begged Mr. Boots, out of a 6pence which I tendered to him, to subtract a penny, and present it to the old lady in question. Mr. Boots took the money, looked at me, and his countenance, not naturally good-humoured, assumed an expression of the most indignant contempt and hatred as he said, "I'm thinking I've no call to give my money away. 6pence is my right for what I've done." "Sir," says I, "you must remember that you did but black 1 pair of shoes, and that you blacked them very badly too." "6pence is my right," says Boots, "a gentleman would give me 6pence. And though I represented to him that a pair of shoes might be blacked in a minute, that 5pence a minute was not usual wages in the country, that many gentlemen, half-pay officers, briefless barristers, unfortunate literary gentlemen, would gladly black 12 pairs of shoes per diem if rewarded with 5 shillings for so doing, there was no means of convincing Mr. Boots. I then demanded back the 6pence, which proposal, however, he declined, saying, after a struggle, he would give the money, but a gentleman would have given 6pence, and so left me with furious rage and contempt. As for the city of Derry, a carman who drove me 1 mile out to dinner at a gentleman's house, where he himself was provided with a comfortable meal, was dissatisfied with 18pence, vowing that a dinner job was always paid half a crown. And not only asserted this, but continued to assert it for a quarter of an hour with the most noble though unsuccessful perseverance. A second car-boy, to whom I gave a shilling for a drive of 2 miles altogether, attacked me because I gave the other boy 18pence. And the porter who brought my bags 50 yards from the coach, entertained me with a dialogue that lasted at least a couple of minutes, and said, I should have had sixpence for carrying one of M. For the car which carried me 2 miles the landlord of the inn made me pay the sum of 5 shillings. He is a godly landlord, has Bibles in the coffee room, the drawing room, and every bedroom in the house, with this inscription. Ut migraturis habita. The traveller's true refuge. Jones's Hotel, Londonderry. This pious double or triple entendre, the reader will, no doubt, admire the first simile establishing the resemblance between this life and an inn, the second allegory showing that the inn and the Bible are both the traveller's refuge. In life we are in death. The hotel in question is about as gay as a family vault. A severe figure of a landlord, in seedy black, is occasionally seen in the dark passages or on the creaking old stairs of the Black Inn. He does not bow to you. Very few landlords in Ireland condescend to acknowledge their guests. He only warns you, a silent solemn gentleman who looks to be something between a clergyman and a sexton. Ut migraturis habita. The migraturis was a vast comfort in the clause. It must, however, be said, for the consolation of future travellers, that when at evening, in the old lonely parlour of the inn, the great gaunt fireplace is filled with coals. 2 dreary funereal candles and sticks glimmering upon the old-fashioned round table, the rain pattering fiercely without, the wind roaring and thumping in the streets. This worthy gentleman can produce a pint of port wine for the use of his migratory guest, which causes the latter to be almost reconciled to the cemetery in which he is resting himself, and he finds himself to his surprise, almost cheerful. There is a mouldy-looking old kitchen, too, which, strange to say, sends out an excellent comfortable dinner, so that the sensation of fear gradually wears off. As in Chester, the ramparts of the town form a pleasant promenade. And the barriers, with which the stout prentice boys of Derry beat off King James in '88. The guns bear the names of the London Company's venerable Cockney titles. It is pleasant for a Londoner to read, and see how, at a pinch, the sturdy citizens can do their work. The public buildings of Derry are, I think, among the best I have seen in Ireland. And the lunatic asylum, especially, is to be pointed out as a model of neatness and comfort. When will the middle classes be allowed to send their own afflicted relatives to public institutions of this excellent kind? Where violence is never practiced, where it is never to the interest of the keeper of the asylum to exaggerate his patient's malady, or to retain him in durance, for the sake of the enormous sums which the sufferer's relatives are made to pay. The gentry of 3 countries which contribute to the asylum have no such resources for members of their own body. Should any be so afflicted, the condition of entering this admirable asylum is that the patient must be a pauper. And on this account he is supplied with every comfort and the best curative means, and his relations are in perfect security. Are the rich in any way so lucky, and if not, why not? The rest of the occurrences at Derry belong, unhappily, to the domain of private life, and though very pleasant to recall are not honestly to be printed. Otherwise, what popular descriptions might be written of the hospitalities of St. Columns, of the jovialities of the mess of the th regiment, of the speeches made and the songs sung, and the devilled turkey at 12 o'clock, and the headache afterwards, all which events could be described in an exceedingly facetious manner. But these amusements are to be met with in every other part of Her Majesty's dominions, and the only point which may be mentioned here as peculiar to this part of Ireland is the difference of the manner of the gentry to that in the south. The northern manner is far more English than that of the other provinces of Ireland. Whether it is better for being English is a question of taste, of which an Englishman can scarcely be a fair judge. Dublin at Last. A wedding party that went across Derry Bridge to the sound of bell and cannon, had to flounder through a thick coat of frozen snow, that covered the slippery planks. And the hills round about were whitened over by the same inclement material. Nor was the weather, implacable towards young lovers and unhappy buckskin postilions shivering in white favours, at all more polite towards the passengers of Her Majesty's mail that runs from Derry to Ballyshannon. Hence the aspect of the country between those 2 places can only be described at the rate of 9 miles an hour, and from such points of observation as may be had through a coach window, starred with ice and mud. While horses were changed we saw a very dirty town, called Strabane, and had to visit the old house of the O'Donnells in Donegal during a quarter of an hour's pause that the coach made therein with an umbrella overhead. The pursuit of the picturesque under umbrellas let us leave to more venturesome souls. The fine weather of the finest season known for many long years in Ireland was over, and I thought with a great deal of yearning of Pat the waiter. At the Shelburne Hotel, Stephen's Green, Dublin, and the gas lamps, and the covered cars, and the good dinners to which they take you. Farewell, then, O wild Donegal! And ye stern passes through which the astonished traveller windeth. Farewell Ballyshannon, and thy salmon leap, and thy bar of sand, over which the white head of the troubled Atlantic was peeping. Likewise, adieu to Lough Erne, and its numberless green islands, and winding river lake, and wavy fir-clad hills. Goodbye, moreover, neat Enniskillen, over the bridge and churches whereof the sun peepeth as the coach starteth from the inn. See, how he shines now on Lord Belmore's stately palace and park, with gleaming porticos and brilliant grassy chases. Now, behold, he is yet higher in the heavens, as the twanging horn proclaims the approach to beggarly Cavan, where a beggarly breakfast awaits the hungry voyager. Snatching up a roll wherewith to satisfy the pangs of hunger, sharpened by the mockery of breakfast, the tourist now hastens in his arduous course, though Virginia, Kells, Navan, by Tara's threadbare mountain, and Screen's green hill. Day darkens, and 100,000 lamps twinkle in the grey horizon. See about the darkling trees a stumpy column rise, see on its base the name of Wellington, though this, because 'tis night, thou canst not see, and cry, it is the Phoenix. On and on, across the iron bridge, and through the streets, dear streets, though dirty, to the citizen's heart how dear you be. And lo, now, with a bump, the dirty coach stops at the seedy inn, 6 ragged porters battle for the bags, 6 wheedling carmen recommend their cars, and, giving first the coachman 18 pence, the cockney says, drive, carboy, to the Shelburne. And so having reached Dublin, it becomes necessary to curtail the observations which were to be made upon that city, which surely ought to have a volume to itself. The humours of Dublin at least require so much space. For instance, there was the dinner at the Kildare Street Club, or the hotel opposite, the dinner in Trinity College Hall, that at Mr. the publisher's, where a dozen of the literary men of Ireland were assembled, and those, say 50, with Harry Lorecker himself, at his mansion of Templemoyle. What a favourable opportunity to discourse upon the peculiarities of Irish character! To describe men of letters, of fashion, and university dons. Sketches of these personages may be prepared, and sent over, perhaps in confidence to Mrs. Sigourney in America, who will of course not print them, but the English habit does not allow of these happy communications between writers and the public. And the author who wishes to dine again at his friend's cost, must needs have a care how he puts him in print. Suffice it to say, that at Kildare Street we had white neckcloths, black waiters, wax candles, and some of the best wine in Europe. At Mr. the publisher's, wax candles, and some of the best wine in Europe. At Mr. Lever's, wax candles, and some of the best wine in Europe. At Trinity College, but there is no need to mention what took place at Trinity College. For on returning to London, and recounting the circumstances of the repast, my friend B., a master of arts of that university, solemnly declared the thing was impossible, no stranger could dine at Trinity College. It was too great a privilege. In a word, he would not believe the story, nor will he to this day, and why, therefore, tell it in vain? I am sure if the fellows of college in Oxford and Cambridge were told that the fellows of T.C.D. only drink beer at dinner, they would not believe that. Such, however, was the fact, or maybe it was a dream, which was followed by another of about 24 gentlemen seated round a common room table after dinner, and by a subsequent vision of a tray of oysters in the apartments of a tutor of the university, sometime before midnight. Did we swallow them or not? The oysters are an open question. Of the Catholic College of Maynooth, I must likewise speak briefly, for the reason that an accurate description of that establishment would be of necessity so disagreeable, that it is best to pass it over in a few words. An Irish Union House is palace to it. Ruin so needless, filth so disgusting, such a look of lazy squalor, no Englishman who has not seen can conceive. Lecture room and dining hall, kitchen and students' room, were all the same. I shall never forget the sight of scores of shoulders of mutton lying on the filthy floor in the former, or the view of a bed and dressing table that I saw in the other. Let the next Maynooth grant include a few shillings' worth of whitewash and a few hundredweights of soap. And if to this be added a half-score of drill sergeants, to see that the students appear clean at lecture, and to teach them to keep their heads up and to look people in the face, Parliament will introduce some cheap reforms into the seminary, which were never needed more than here. Why should the place be so shamefully ruinous and foully dirty? Lime is cheap, and water plenty at the canal hard by. Why should a stranger, after a week's stay in the country, be able to discover a priest by the scowl on his face, and his doubtful downcast manner? Is it a point of discipline that his reverence should be made to look as ill-humoured as possible? And I hope these words will not be taken hostilely. It would have been quite as easy, and more pleasant, to say the contrary, had the contrary seemed to me to have been the fact. And to have declared that the priests were remarkable for their expression of candour, and their college for its extreme neatness and cleanliness. This complaint of neglect applies to other public institutions besides Maynooth. The Mansion House, when I saw it, was a very dingy abode for the right honourable Lord Mayor, and that Lord Mayor Mr. O'Connell. I saw him in full council, in a brilliant robe of crimson velvet, ornamented with white satin bows and sable collar, in an enormous cocked hat, like a slice of an eclipsed moon. The aldermen and common council, in a black oak parlour, and at a dingy green table, were assembled around him, and a debate of thrilling interest to the town ensued. It related, I think, to water pipes. The great man did not speak publicly, but was occupied chiefly at the end of the table, giving audiences to at least a score of clients and petitioners. The next day I saw him in the famous Corn Exchange. The building without has a substantial look, but the hall within is rude, dirty, and ill-kept. Hundreds of persons were assembled in the black, steaming place, no inconsiderable share of frieze-coats were among them. And many small repealers, who could but lately have assumed their breeches, ragged as they were. These kept up a great chorus of shouting, and, here, at every pause in the great repealer's address. Mr. O'Connell was reading a report from his repeal wardens, which proved that when repeal took place, commerce and prosperity would instantly flow into the country. Its innumerable harbours would be filled with countless ships, its immense water power would be directed to the turning of myriads of mills, its vast energies and resources brought into full action. At the end of the report 3 cheers were given for repeal, and in the midst of a great shouting Mr. O'Connell leaves the room. Mr. Quiglin, roars an active aide-de-camp to the doorkeeper, a covered crier for the Lord Mayor. The covered car came, I saw his lordship get into it. Next day he was Lord Mayor no longer, but Alderman O'Connell in his state coach, with the handsome greys whose manes were tied up with green ribbon, following the new Lord Mayor to the right honourable inauguration. Javelin men, city marshals, looking like military undertakers, private carriages, glass coaches, cars, covered and uncovered, and thousands of yelling ragamuffins, formed the civic procession of that faded, worn-out, insolvent old Dublin corporation. The walls of this city had been placarded with huge notices to the public, that O'Connell's rent day was at hand. And I went round to all the chapels in town on that Sunday, not a little to the scandal of some Protestant friends, to see the popular behaviour. Every door was barred, of course, with plate holders. And heaps of pence at the humble entrances, and banknotes at the front gates, told the willingness of the people to reward their champion. The carboy who drove me had paid his little tribute of 4 pence at morning mass. The waiter who brought my breakfast had added to the national subscription with his humble shilling, and the Catholic gentleman with whom I dined, and between whom and Mr. O'Connell there is no great love lost, pays his annual donation, out of gratitude for old services, and to the man who won Catholic emancipation for Ireland. The piety of the people at the chapels is a sight, too, always well worthy to behold. Nor indeed is this religious fervour less in the Protestant places of worship, the warmth and attention of the congregation, the enthusiasm with which hymns are sung and responses uttered contrasts curiously with the cool formality of worshippers at home. The service at St. Patrick's is finely sung, and the shameless English custom of retreating after the anthem is properly prevented by locking the gates and having the music after the sermon. The interior of the cathedral itself, however, to an Englishman who has seen the neat and beautiful edifices of his own country, will be anything but an object of admiration. The greater part of the huge old building is suffered to remain in gaunt decay, and with its stalls of sham Gothic, and the tawdry old rags and gimcracks of the most illustrious order of St. Patrick, whose pasteboard helmets and calico banners, and lath swords, well characterize the humbug of chivalry which they are made to represent, looks like a theatre behind the scenes. Paddy's opera, however, is a noble performance, and the Englishman may here listen to a half-hour sermon, and in the anthem to a bass singer whose voice is one of the finest ever heard. The drama does not flourish much more in Dublin than in any other part of the country. Operatic stars make their appearance occasionally, and managers lose money. I was at a fine concert, at which Lablache and others performed, where there were not 100 people in the pit of the pretty theatre, and where the only encore given was to a young woman in ringlets and yellow satin, who stepped forward and sang, Coming Through the Rye, or some other scientific composition, in an exceedingly small voice. On the nights when the regular drama was enacted, the audience was still smaller. The theatre of Fishamble Street was given up to the performances of the Reverend Mr. Gregg and his Protestant company, whose soirees I did not attend. And, at the Abbey Street Theatre, whither I went in order to see, if possible, some specimens of the national humour, I found a company of English people ranting through a melodrama, the tragedy whereof was the only laughable thing to be witnessed. Humbler popular recreations may be seen by the curious. One night I paid twopence to see a puppet show, such an entertainment as may have been popular 130 years ago, and is described in the Spectator. But the company here assembled were not, it scarcely need be said, of the genteel sort. There were a score of boys, however, and a dozen of labouring men, who were quite happy and contented with the piece performed, and loudly applauded. Then in passing homewards of a night, you hear, at the humble public houses, the sound of many a fiddle, and the stamp of feet dancing the good old jig, which is still maintaining a struggle with teetotalism, and, though vanquished now, may rally some day and overcome the enemy. At Kingstown, especially, the old fire-worshippers yet seem to muster pretty strongly. Loud is the music to be heard in the taverns there, and the cries of encouragement to the dancers. Of the numberless amusements that take place in the Phoenix, it is not very necessary to speak. Here you may behold garrison races, and reviews, lord lieutenants in brown greatcoats, aides-de-camp scampering about like mad in blue, fat colonels roaring, charge, to immense heavy dragoons, dark riflemen lining woods and firing, galloping cannoneers banging and blazing right and left. Here comes His Excellency the Commander-in-Chief, with his huge feathers, and white hair, and hooked nose, and yonder sits His Excellency the Ambassador from the Republic of Topinambo in a glass coach, smoking a cigar. The honest Dublinites make a great deal of such small dignitaries as His Excellency of the glass coach. You hear everybody talking of him, and asking which is he. And when presently one of Sir Robert Peel's sons makes his appearance on the course, the public rush delighted to look at him. They love great folks, those honest Emerald Islanders, more intensely than any people I ever heard of, except the Americans. They still cherish the memory of the sacred George IV. They chronicle genteel small beer with never-failing assiduity. They go in long trains to a sham court simpering in tights and bags, with swords between their legs. Oh heaven and earth, what joy! Why are the Irish noblemen absentees? If their lordships like respect, where would they get it so well as in their own country? The Irish noblemen are very likely going through the same delightful routine of duty before their real sovereign in real tights and bagwigs, as it were, performing their graceful and lofty duties, and celebrating the august service of the throne. These, of course, the truly loyal heart can only respect, and I think a drawing-room at St. James's the grandest spectacle that ever feasted the eye or exercised the intellect. The crown, surrounded by its knights and nobles, its priests, its sages, and their respective ladies. Illustrious foreigners, men learned in the law, heroes of land and sea, beef-eaters, gold sticks, gentlemen at arms, rallying round the throne and defending it with those swords which never knew defeat, and would surely, if tried, secure victory. These are sights and characters which every man must look upon with a thrill of respectful awe, and count amongst the glories of his country. What lady that sees this will not confess that she reads every one of the drawing-room costumes, from Majesty down to Miss and Maria Smith? And all the names of the presentations, from Prince Bakaboksky, by the Russian ambassador, to Ensign Stubbs on appointment. We are bound to read these accounts. It is our pride, our duty as Britons. But though one may honor the respect of the aristocracy of the land for the sovereign, yet there is no reason why those who are not of the aristocracy should be aping their betters, and the Dublin Castle business has, I cannot but think, a very high life below stairs look. There is no aristocracy in Dublin. Its magnates are tradesmen Sir Fiat Houstus, Sir Blacker Dosey, Mr. Sergeant Bluebag, or Mr. Councillor O'Fee. Brass plates are their titles of honor and they live by their boluses or their briefs. What call have these worthy people to be dangling and grinning at Lord Lieutenant's levees, and playing sham aristocracy before a sham sovereign? Oh, that old humbug of a castle! It is the greatest sham of all the shams in Ireland. Although the season may be said to have begun, for the courts are opened, and the noblesse de la robe have assembled, I do not think the genteel quarters of the town look much more cheerful. They still, for the most part, wear their faded appearance and lean, half-pay look. There is the beggar still dawdling here and there. Sounds of carriages or footmen do not deaden the clink of the burly policeman's boot heels. You may see, possibly, a smutty-faced nursemaid leading out her little charges to walk, or the observer may catch a glimpse of Mick the footman lolling at the door, and grinning as he talks to some dubious tradesman. Mick and John are very different characters externally and inwardly. Profound essays, involving the histories of the two countries for 1,000 years, might be written regarding Mick and John, and the moral and political influences which have developed the flunkies of the two nations. The friend too with whom Mick talks at the door is a puzzle to a Londoner. I have hardly ever entered a Dublin house without meeting with some such character on my way in or out. He looks too shabby for a dun, and not exactly ragged enough for a beggar, a doubtful, lazy, dirty family vassal guerrilla footman. I think it is he who makes a great noise, and whispering, and clattering, handing in the dishes to Mick from outside of the dining-room door. When an Irishman comes to London he brings Aaron with him. And 10 to 1 you will find one of these queer retainers about his place. London one can only take leave of by degrees. The great town melts away into suburbs, which soften, as it were, the parting between the Cockney and his darling birthplace. But you pass from some of the stately fine Dublin streets straight into the country. After number 46 Eccles Street, for instance, potatoes begin at once. You are on a wide green plain, diversified by occasional cabbage plots, by drying grounds white with chemises, in the midst of which the chartered wind is revelling. And though in the map some fanciful engineer has laid down streets and squares, they exist hot on paper, nor, indeed, can there be any need of them at present, in a quarter where houses are not wanted so much as people to dwell in the same. If the genteel portions of the town look to the full as melancholy as they did, the downright poverty ceases, I fear, to make so strong an impression as it made 4 months ago. Going over the same ground again, places appear to have quite a different aspect, and, with their strangeness, poverty and misery have lost much of their terror. The people, though dirtier and more ragged, seem certainly happier than those in London. Near to the King's Court, for instance, a noble building, as are almost all the public edifices of the city, is a straggling green suburb, containing numberless little shabby, patched, broken-windowed huts, with rickety gardens dotted with rags that have been washed, and children that have not, and thronged with all sorts of ragged inhabitants. Near to the suburb in the town, is a dingy old mysterious district, called Stony Batter, where some houses have been allowed to reach an old age, extraordinary in this country of premature ruin. and look as if they had been built some 60 years since. In these and the neighboring tenements, not so old but equally ruinous and mouldy, there is a sort of vermin swarm of humanity, dirty faces at all the dirty windows, children on all the broken steps. Smutty slipshod women clacking and bustling about, and old men dawdling. Well, only paint and prop the tumbling gates and huts in the suburb, and fancy the stony Batterites clean, and you would have rather a gay and agreeable picture of human life of workpeople and their families reposing after their labors. They are all happy, and sober, and kind-hearted. They seem kind, and play with the children, the young women having a gay good-natured joke for the passer-by, the old seemingly contented, and buzzing to one another. It is only the costume, as it were, that has frightened the stranger, and made him fancy that people so ragged must be unhappy. Observation grows used to the rags as much as the people do, and my impression of the walk through this district on a sunshiny, clear, autumn evening, is that of a fete. I am almost ashamed it should be so. Near to Stony Batter lies a group of huge gloomy edifices, an hospital, a penitentiary, a madhouse, and a poorhouse. I visited the latter of these, the North Dublin Union House, an enormous establishment, which accommodates 2,000 beggars. Like all the public institutions of the country, it seems to be well conducted, and is a vast, orderly, and cleanly place, wherein the prisoners are better clothed, better fed, better housed than they can hope to be when at liberty. We were taken into all the wards in due order, the schools and nursery for the children, the dining rooms, day rooms, and, of the men and women. Each division is so accommodated, as also with a large court or ground to walk and exercise in. Among the men, there are very few able-bodied, the most of them, the keeper said, having gone out for the harvest time, or as soon as the potatoes came in. If they go out, they cannot return before the expiration of a month. The guardians have been obliged to establish this prohibition, lest the persons requiring relief should go in and out too frequently. The old men were assembled in considerable numbers in a long day-room that is comfortable and warm. Some of them were picking oakum by way of employment, but most of them were past work. All such inmates of the house as are able-bodied being occupied upon the premises. Their hall was airy and as clean as brush and water could make it, the men equally clean, and their grey jackets and Scotch caps stout and warm. Thence we were led, with a sort of satisfaction, by the guardian, to the kitchen, a large room, at the end of which might be seen certain coppers, emitting, it must owned, a very faint inhospitable smell. It was on Friday, and rice milk is the food on that day, each man being served with a pint canful, of which cans a great number stood smoking upon stretchers. The platters were laid, each with its portion of salt, in the large clean dining room hard by. "Look at that rice," said the keeper, taking up a bit. "Try it, sir, it's delicious." "I'm sure I hope it is." The old women's room was crowded with, I should think, at least 400 old ladies, neat and nice, in white clothes and caps, sitting demurely on benches, doing nothing for the most part. But some employed, like the old men, in fiddling with the oakum. "There's tobacco here," says the guardian, in a loud voice. "Who's smoking tobacco?" "Fate, and I wish dear was some tobaccy here," says one old lady, "and my service to you, Mr. Leary, and I hope one of the gentlemen has a snuff-box, and a pinch for a poor old woman." But we had no boxes. And if any person who reads this visit, goes to a poor house or lunatic asylum, let him carry a box, if for that day only a pinch is like Dives's drop of water to those poor limboed souls. Some of the poor old creatures began to stand up as we came in. I can't say how painful such an honor seemed to me. There was a separate room for the able-bodied females, and the place and courts were full of stout, red-cheeked, bouncing women. If the old ladies looked respectable, I cannot say the young ones were particularly good-looking. There were some Hogarthian faces amongst them, sly, leering, and hideous. I fancied I could see only too well what these girls had been. Is it charitable or not to hope that such bad faces could only belong to bad women? "Here, sir, is the nursery," said the guide, flinging open the door of a long room. There may have been 80 babies in it, with as many nurses and mothers. Close to the door sat one with as beautiful a face as I almost ever saw. She had at her breast a very sickly and puny child, and looked up, as we entered, with a pair of angelical eyes, and a face that Mr. Eastlake could paint, a face that had been angelical, that is, for there was the snow still, as it were, but with the footmark on it. I asked her how old she was. She did not know. She could not have been more than 15 years, the poor child. She said she had been a servant and there was no need of asking anything more about her story. I saw her grinning at one of her comrades as we went out of the room. Her face did not look angelical then. Ah, young master or old villain, who did this, have you not enough wickedness of your own to answer for, that you must take another's sins upon your shoulders, and be this wretched child's sponsor in crime? But this chapter must be made as short as possible, and so I will not say how much prouder Mr. Leary, the keeper, was of his fat pigs than of his paupers. How he pointed us out the burial ground of the family of the poor. Their coffins were quite visible through the niggardly mould. And the children might peep at their fathers over the burial ground playground wall. Nor how we went to see the Linen Hall of Dublin, that huge, useless, lonely, decayed place, in the vast windy solitudes of which stands the simpering statue of George IV, pointing to some bales of shirting, over which he is supposing to extend his august protection. The cheers of the rabble hailing the new Lord Mayor were the last sounds that I heard in Dublin, and I quitted the kind friends I had made there with the sincerest regret. As for forming an opinion of Ireland, such as is occasionally asked from a traveller on his return, that is as difficult an opinion to form as to express. And the puzzle which has perplexed the gravest and wisest, may be confessed by a humble writer of light literature, whose aim it only was to look at the manners and the scenery of the country, and who does not venture to meddle with questions of more serious import. To have an opinion about Ireland, one must begin by getting at the truth, and where is it to be had in the country? Or rather, there are two truths, the Catholic truth and the Protestant truth. The two parties do not see things with the same eyes. I recollect, for instance, a Catholic gentleman telling me that the primate had £43,500 a year. A Protestant clergyman gave me, chapter and verse, the history of a shameful perjury and malversation of money on the part of a Catholic priest, nor was one tale more true than the other. But belief is made a party business. And the receiving of the Archbishop's income would probably not convince the Catholic, any more than the clearest evidence to the contrary altered the Protestant's opinion. Ask about an estate, you may be sure almost that people will make misstatements, or volunteer them if not asked. Ask a Catagar about his rent, or his landlord, you cannot trust him. I shall never forget the glee with which a gentleman in Munster told me how he had sent off Tocqueville and Beaumont with such a set of stories. Inglis was seized, as I am told, and mystified in the same way. In the midst of all these truths attested with, I give ye my sacred honour and word, which is the stranger to select. And how are we to trust philosophers who make theories upon such data? Meanwhile it is satisfactory to know, upon testimony so general as to be equivalent almost to fact, that wretched as it is, the country is steadily advancing, nor nearly so wretched now as it was a score of years since. And let us hope that the middle class, which this increase of prosperity must generate, and of which our laws have hitherto forbidden the existence in Ireland, making there a population of Protestant aristocracy and Catholic peasantry, will exercise the greatest and most beneficial influence over country. Too independent to be bullied by priest or squire, having their interest in quiet, and alike indisposed to servility or to rebellion, may not as much be hoped from the gradual formation of such a class, as from any legislative meddling. It is the want of the middle class that has rendered the squire so arrogant, and the clerical or political demagogue so powerful, and I think Mr. O'Connell himself would say that the existence of such a body would do more for the steady acquirement of orderly freedom, than the occasional outbreak of any crowd, influenced by any eloquence from altar or tribune.